Well, welcome back to Heart of the Shepherd, where we help you live a transformed life and leave transformed ministries. I am your host, Caleb Trinkman, and I am here with my dad, Rob Trinkman. And today we are talking about standing against darkness, which is part of our series, 6 Moves to Change the World.
Hey, yeah, really glad that you're here with us. Here's what we know about you. We know that you want to see God work in your city, your country, your region. You want to see people, you want to see a culture changed by the gospel with hope, love, joy, and peace. But the reality is it's hard, isn't it? Darkness is always pushing back. There's persecution, there's family difficulties, there's financial limitations, there's suffering, there's health problems, there's cultural hardness. And in this moment right now, I perhaps more than in recent years, I feel the fact that the world is full of darkness. There's sex trafficking, there's poverty, there's war and conflict. There's real human beings made in God's image that are living in horrible situations. And for those of us that are followers of Jesus, most troubling of all, there's people that don't know Christ, don't know his love, that are heading to an eternity without him. The world feels dark right now.
I think, obviously, because we've lived in Europe for a decade and a half now. I mean, that's crazy to think. I'm 15 next week, so that's a long time. But most of Europe, depending on where you are, but less than 1% of the country has an active faith in Christianity. And I think sometimes when we feel darkness pressing in, sometimes we feel hopeless. Sometimes we question our identity. Who am I? Sometimes we question our ability to help the kingdom of God. What can I do? I mean, I'm just one person. How can I affect people at my church? How can I help people in my business or at my workplace, whatever? And then I think sometimes as a church as well, I think sometimes as a global church, but also as individual churches in individual places. I think sometimes churches, they just go about their daily Sunday, their usual Sunday, and sometimes there's a sense about the church where they just don't really have a drive to say we can change, but instead they feel discouraged, they feel unmotivated, they feel afraid, and they feel hopeless.
Yeah, we often feel hopeless as darkness presses in, don't we? Others are a little different though. Other people, they ramp up. Maybe you're like this. You're ready to fight. You're ready to act. And I think this is often a good instinct as long as it's characterized by the fruit of the Spirit and love for enemies, that famous passage in Luke 6. And this desire to stand against darkness is a wonderful desire, but of course it can have a shadow side too. We can get caught doing things in our own strength or not be characterized by Christ's way of doing things. And so when darkness starts to press in, sometimes it's hard for us to know what to do.
So let's kind of take a zoom back. I think our question today then is, as we've set it up, I mean, what do we do when darkness presses in? And obviously we're looking at Acts, so our story starts in Acts. But if you look at Acts chapter 11, I mean, there's just so much good happening there. In verse 26, the first Christians are called. It's the beginning of the church. Then Paul and Barnabas team up in verse 25. I mean, it's like Steph Curry and Kevin Durant come together. I mean, it's like this first super team, the All-Star team's coming together. Verse 29 to 30, they're doing great things. They're giving to the poor. They're doing the mission. The movement has serious momentum. Like this might actually happen. They might actually reach the ends of the earth in less than 2,000 years. I mean,
yeah, you're going, this is going to happen. Look at what God is doing. And then we hit Acts chapter 12 and darkness starts to press back. Notice what happens. Acts chapter 12, it says it was about that time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. And here we start to see Herod is pressing back against the leadership of the church. Some get arrested, but then James, the brother of John, this is a huge blow. This is one of the original 12. This is one of the big three, Peter, James, and John, one of the sons of thunder. How did they get that nickname, by the way? This is one of Jesus's three closest, the big three, dead. And I mean, poor John. I mean, imagine this loss for him, his brother, his business partner, his friend gone. Imagine the loss for the rest of the apostles. You know, they were 12, then they lost Judas, then now they're 11, now they're 10. This is one of their leaders, one of their big guys gone. Darkness is pressing back. Leadership of the church is getting destroyed.
And then you look at, obviously, verse 3 and 4, Herod goes after Peter. And Peter's the rock of the church. Like, if he goes down, I mean, the disciples, you know, they got 2 feet, but he's the rock of the church. He's the one that's keeping everybody motivated. He's the one that everybody looks to as, hey, you're supposed to keep us in there. And more than that, more than a, you know, a motivational standpoint, they won't have any political power. They have no influence. They won't have any connections. I mean, if the sooner that the devil, frankly, or working through Herod, can kill all the main connections to Jesus, the less validity the gospel has. So darkness is really pressing in.
Yeah, they could end up with a leaderless church here, couldn't they? And they're stuck. I mean, what can they do? This is a no-name movement with no power, no connections. There's nothing that they can do. And so we see in verse 5 the only thing they can do. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. And then from here, the story gets super funny. So notice what happens. Verse 6, the night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. I just think this is crazy. It's the night before, and he's asleep. And Peter's sleeping away. Suddenly, verse 7, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. Quick, get up, he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. He's evidently sleeping quite deeply because the angel has to kick him in the side to wake him up. It's the night before his trial for death, and he's sound asleep. Then the angel said to him, put on your clothes and your sandals, and Peter did so. Wrap your cloak around me and follow me, the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. Peter just thinks he's having a really nice dream here. They passed through the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. When they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. And that's when Peter realizes, oh, hey, this is for real. So verse 11, then Peter came to himself and said, now I know without a doubt that the Lord sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were anticipating. So when this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were knocking. This is probably the same place where the disciples had the Last Supper with Jesus, this upper room where they've gathered. And everyone has gathered there to pray. Okay, they've been praying for days and nights, all day. Lord, release Peter, release Peter. And verse 13, Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant girl named Rhoda came to answer the door. Now, just for kicks and giggles, remember that it's a servant girl that stumps Peter, and he ends up denying Christ 3 times. So there's something about Peter and servant girls. This servant girl, Rhoda, shows up, and verse 14, when she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, Peter's at the door. Okay, so you have to picture this. It's the middle of the night. Peter first thinks it's first he's sleeping solid, then he thinks he has a great dream, then he realizes it's real. They're gathered praying for his release, and he shows up, and she's so excited that she leaves him at the gate and runs inside to tell everybody about it. So middle of the night, he's standing there going, guys, could you let me in here, please? But notice their response. This is so classic. Verse 15, you're out of your mind, they told her. When she kept insisting that it was so, they said, it must be an angel. Okay, so track this with me. This is so human. This is so just like us. What are they praying for? Peter's release. What does God do? Release Peter. How do they respond? Can't be true. Can't trust these crazy servant girls. They're literally praying for Peter to be released. God does it, and they call her a liar. What sort of faith is that prays, and when God answers, you don't believe that it's happened? Leave us alone, they say. We're praying for Peter to get released. No, leave us alone. We're praying. The irony is that we can get this, though, can't we? I mean, this is a full-scale, no doubt miracle. It's unexpected. It's unusual. No one could have expected it to happen, except it's exactly what they're praying for. And this is just like us, isn't it? God, I can't see a way forward. God, I need your help. God, make this possible. And then it happens. We go, no, that wasn't God. But I think even as we chuckle at them, we also should be learning from them. Because notice what's true about them. This isn't some, God, please help me today as I walk into work sort of a prayer. We used to call those arrow prayers, and there's a place for them. But that's not what this is. These people have gathered and they've prayed for days and nights. And we don't know why God answers this prayer and he doesn't answer it with James. We don't know why he doesn't answer it with Stephen, why sometimes God intervenes and sometimes God doesn't. But what we do know is they have gathered and they have prayed and they have prayed and they have prayed. And they're praying at a different scale than we often pray. The first thing I notice about their prayers is they're praying impossible prayers. Hudson Taylor, the famous missionary to China, used to say, you should always have 2 or 3 prayers on your prayer list that are impossible, so that when they come true, you'll know only God could have done that. And I made that a habit a number of years ago to go, I'm going to pray for the things we usually pray for our families, for our health, for the normalcies of life, job, career, all of that. God cares about all of that. But I'm also going to have a few things that I'm praying for regularly that I just go, if that were to happen, I would just have to fall on my knees and say, only God could do that. And several times over the years, I've seen God answer those sorts of prayers in dramatic ways. And it's such a privilege to pray impossible prayers and then watch God answer them. And they're praying for an impossible prayer here. A second thing that we notice about them is they're praying long. They're praying through the night and for many days. We see that in verses 3, 4, and 6. And it's costly. They're praying throughout the night. When Peter gets released in the middle of the night, what are they doing? They're praying. And Jesus did the same thing, by the way. Remember how often over the course of 3 years of ministry, he would retreat to pray. And in fact, at one point, he prays all night in the selection of the 12, as we talked about last week. It's costly how they pray. And I think this is important for us. I want us to get this. It's not that God listens to our prayers because they're costly. As if God's up there and he goes, well, twist my arm just a little bit harder and I might answer. No, that's not that. It's just that for most of us, if we're really going to pray, especially if we're going to do the long work of prayer, it's going to be costly because we're busy. We have stuff going on. The schedule is full. And finding that time to stop, to pause, to pray for a long period of time is going to cost us. One of the things that I do fairly regularly in life is I just have a daily 5 that I pray. I just, for different seasons, I pick 5 things that I go, God, these 5 things really matter to me. I think these are crucial things in the life of our family and on our ministry. Every day I want to pray for these 5 things. And I am amazed at how God works in those ways. And then the other thing that Liz and I don't do nearly as often as we should, but I would like to do more, and we occasionally do, is we'll set aside half a day, a full day, fast, pray, just meet with the Lord. And I can tell you, some of the most critical moments in our life have come as a result of those prayer times. Times where God has shaped our ministry, shaped our family, shaped our direction for the next years that are ahead. And friends, as I look at our world today, I think there's a need for Christians to stop and do the long, costly work of prayer. When I think of how people are suffering around the world, how people are in war zones and in violence, how countries are struggling, there's a need for us to stop, to get on our knees, to do the work of fighting against darkness, often in the only way that we can.
Well, there's this thing called Gather 25 that happened here recently I think it was the 1st of March, that weekend area. And that's exactly what they did, actually. I don't know if you heard about it, but
they did, yeah.
Yeah, they gathered people from all around the globe, from all sorts of, from a lot of countries, and they just prayed and they worshiped, and all denominations, and that's exactly what they did. So, but I want to zoom out just a little bit, and obviously we started the story with Herod. We'd kind of worked through what happens to Herod afterwards. James is dead now. Peter is free. What happens with Herod?
Yeah, so this is super interesting here at the end of Acts chapter 12. I read Acts for years, and I always got to this story, and I went, why did Luke put this in here? Because it's the strangest story. Here's what happens. Notice how weird it is. End of verse 19, then Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there a while. This is because Peter gets free, and Herod's kind of, baffled, and so he goes, okay, fine, I'm out of Jerusalem. And so verse 20, he had been quarreling with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they now joined together and sought an audience with him. Having secured the support of Blastus, there's a name for your kid someday, Caleb, the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace, because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. Okay, Luke, why is this in here, This is just a bunch of random information. Verse 21, on the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robe, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. And of course, because he controls their food supply, they shout, "This is the voice of a God, not a man." Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. And we go, okay, interesting story. Why is this in here? For years I thought, why does Luke include this? Is this just kind of a story about don't let the pride get the best of you? But what does this have to do with the overall story of the book of Acts? And then all of a sudden, I realized, wait a second. Notice what happened. Beginning of this chapter, Herod is taking out the church. John, Peter, people in jail. End of this chapter, Herod's dead.
So the big idea, God is protecting his church. Although they will go through tribulation and trials and things like that, God will build his church, even through the hard bit.
Yeah. And by the way, just because this is so gross, did you notice what it says? I've even checked it in the Greek. And he was eaten by worms, and then he died. Let that one sink in a little bit. Don't stand against Christ's church. It does not end well for you. So, here's our key question for us today. What darkness needs to be stood against in your country, in your city, in your community? Where is Satan at work? And how do you tend to respond when darkness presses in? Do you grow discouraged? Do you grow fearful? As you look at the darkness around the world right now, the darkness next door, the darkness across the street, the darkness around the world, are you discouraged? Are you fearful? Do you tend to get stressed or frantic or busy? Do you tend to power up and fight, but not in the sorts of ways that represent the fruit of the Spirit and love for enemies? How do you stand against darkness? And the second question is, what do you pray about? What do you pray about? God wants to hear about everything in our lives, all of our needs, big, little, everything in between. But if our prayers don't include standing against darkness, I think we're missing some of the point of Acts chapter 12. What opposition to the gospel needs your focused prayer in these days? Now, I think about this and I realize this may just all seem really basic. Like, really, Rob, you look around the world and your solution today is just pray? That's it?
No, the solution is to pray that the bad guys would be eaten by worms.
Yeah,
that's the solution.
There's the solution. Well, no, that's not it. I mean, we obviously, and hear me clearly, we need to act as well when we can. This is not an excuse not to act. I was interacting with somebody recently, and their kind of attitude was, well, God's going to do what God's going to do. No, that's not, yes, God's going to do what God's going to do. But the downbeat of Scripture is that does not give us an excuse not to act. I mean, even elsewhere in the book of Acts, when the disciples could push back against persecution or could escape, they did. They acted. And we, too, may need to act to fight against darkness in whatever Christ-like ways are available to us. But I do want to say this. Here's my at the bigger level, my fear. My fear is most of us aren't praying like this. We're not pleading with God to press back against darkness. And so, yes, we need to act, but we need to pray. Men and women of the church, we need to stand against darkness together. So here's my encouragement to us this week. Grab your spouse, grab a friend, grab a brother and sister in Christ, whoever it is, and really pray. look ahead a month and find some glimmer of light on your calendar and set aside half a day to fast and to pray, to ask God to act in the ways that he did in Acts chapter 12. We need to stand against darkness together.
Well, that's it today for Heart of the Shepherd podcast. You can check our other stuff out on Spotify, obviously on YouTube, on iTunes, and yeah, please do share this with other people. We'd love this to be a blessing to as many people as available. And please, leave us a review. Tell us what you like about it. Tell us how we can improve. We always love those things. And next week we are back with part 3 of 6 moves that change the world. So do you have anything final to add?
No. Let's stand against darkness together, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here next time for part 3. Thanks for joining us today.
Have a good week, and may God bless you. Bye.